In the days when the good old King Arthur was able to feast nights each day at his famous round table, there lived in a cottage, it matters not where, indeed I don't know, and I'm sure you don't care, a thrifty young farmer, and he and his wife knew little of trouble and nothing of strife. It happened one day that the lady felt sad, and she cried, "Oh, I wish that a baby I had." "Have your wish then," a voice from her pocket replied. Up went both her hands and her eyes opened wide, and out of her pocket a fairy arose. In what shape or form, there's no one who knows. But just as her handkerchief fell to the ground, she heard in her pocket another strange sound. "Mamma, dear mamma, see, I have come." Just the length and the thickness of dear papa's thumb. Mamma said, "How charming. Now we are so blessed. But child, you'll take cold, you have come quite undressed. From those pea pods the stuff for a coat you can choose. 2 pips of this apple will make you nice shoes. And if a good boy you will promise to be, knickerbockers I'll scrape from the carrot you see." Just then to the cottage the fairy queen came and said to the lady, "Your boy I will name." She waved her white wand and said, "Boy, hither come. Henceforth and forever your name is Tom Thumb." "Oh, what a nice name," his fond mother said. "I'm glad he's named. He can now go to bed. With a bean pod a very snug crib we can make, and for curtains the skins of 2 cherries I'll take." So Tom Thumb went to bed without crying each night, and got up by a ladder as soon as 'twas light. Tom went with his mother to see a dun cow. The leaf of a thistle he took for a bough. He sat down upon it, but shocking to tell, the cow seized the thistle and Tom Thumb as well. To the cow's upper jaw Tom manfully clung. He kicked her front teeth and he tickled her tongue. The cow could not ask him what he was about, so she opened her mouth and she let him jump out. To his mother he ran, he told his tale, and she soon gave him a bath in an old silver spoon. How to play games with cherry stones Tommy soon knew, for the longer he lived the more cunning he grew. But Tom was dishonest, I'm sorry to say, for he stole cherry stones in a curious way. Into the bags of his playmates he crept, and there sometimes till morning he quietly slept. He then helped himself, so that with cherry stones he seemed always provided with plenty to be. A boy caught him one day in his bag stealing stones, so he fastened and shook it, not heeding Tom's groans. Then he let out our hero, who felt very sore, and said that he never would steal any more. Tom's mother was mixing a pudding one day. He fell into the batter, and sprawling he lay. He was bound in a cloth and put into the pot, but he soon began kicking, the water was hot. "The pudding's bewitched," said his mother, "so I will give it to Tinker. He is now passing by." The tinker was pleased, but he soon was afraid, for Tom in the pudding a dismal noise made. Said the tinker, "Of puddings, this pudding is worst," and he threw it right over the hedge, where it burst. Then Tommy ran home, so ill it is said, he was bathed in a teacup and put into bed. 2 days after that, Tom was seized by a cow, who bore him away to grim giant Grumbow. The giant exclaimed, "What a queer little fly! I'll put it in water, and there let it die." Then into the river the poor Tom Thumb was thrown, and made a small splash like a round pebble stone. He was seized by a salmon, who swallowed him whole. But then just a fisherman named Simon Cole caught the salmon and sent him without much delay to the king, who for salmon would handsomely pray. The salmon was cut, but it made the cook stare, for, as no doubt you guess, our small hero was there. When King Arthur saw Tom, he was filled with delight, and he and the queen kept awake all the night. But before they did that, the king asked Tom his name, and of course Tom had read of King Arthur's great fame. So Tom told him his name and his history also, and said, "I should like my mother to go." "Then go," said the king, "but pray come again soon." Tom said, "I'll be with you tomorrow at noon." Tom did as he promised, but shocking to tell, into hot porridge made for the king Tommy fell. A maid took him out. "Poor fellow," said she, "I think in a mousetrap much safer you'll be." The maid quite forgot about Tom in the trap, till the king, having heard of this awkward mishap, sent 2 or 3 pages of honor to know why Tom Thumb was kept in the kitchen below. The servants all then were of course much afraid, and went down on their knees when Jemima the maid recollected the trap. To Tom Thumb she went to tell him the message King Arthur had sent, and begged for her pardon he'd do what he could. Tom Thumb very kindly replied that he would. So, as soon as before great King Arthur he came, he said, "Pardon the servants, they are not to blame. And as for Jemima, no maid I have seen, so thoughtful and civil and steady and clean. Yeah, all that she does is so worthy of praise, that I hope great King Arthur her wages will raise." The king was so pleased that he could not say no, but turned to Earl Marshal and said, "My lord, go. Tell Jemima, the maid, she has nothing to fear. Her wages are raised 13 shillings a year." Then the Earl Marshal bowed himself down to the ground and said, "My lord king, there's not to be found such a generous monarch throughout the land. Most gladly I'll do what you're pleased to command." Tom Thumb so delighted the king and the queen that wherever they went he was sure to be seen. In the king's waistcoat pocket he sometimes would loll, sometimes he would lounge in the queen's parasol. A ladder he had to get into her lap, and he sometimes would hide in the bows of her cap. Once a captain came in who had on a new coat. Tom Thumb, just to tease him, jumped right down his throat. The captain, alarmed, sent for 30 strong men. By the time they arrived, Tom had jumped back again. The captain was vexed, but what could he do? The king and queen laughed, and he was forced to laugh too. But he said to Earl Marshal, "The next time I come, I'll keep far enough from that little Tom Thumb." King Arthur, for fun, made Tom Thumb a knight. He was armed with a sword and was taught how to fight. Instead of a steed, he rode a white mouse who knew all the corners and holes in the house. One day, a great cat came rushing at Tom, but he told her not to go to the place she came from. She did not move on. Tom thought she would scratch, or that perhaps she might fancy his white mouse to catch. So he drew his good sword, so sharp and so bright. Puss ran with dismay and half fainted from fright. As the king and the queen and the court slept one day, the fairy queen Mab came and fetched Tom away. In the land of the fairies he dwells for some years, and then once again in old England appears. But the times are now changed, and King Arthur is dead, and Thunstone, another king, reigns in his stead. Tom went to the palace without much ado. He was shown King Thunstone, who said, "Who are you?" Tom bowed to the king and the queen, his fair bride, and thus in his musical voice he replied, "My name is Tom Thumb, from the fairies I come. When King Arthur shone, this court was my own. In me he delighted, by him I was knighted. Did you ever hear of Sir Thomas Thumb?" The king said, "Sir Thomas, I hope you'll agree to live here to play with the queen and with me." So Tom went to the palace and lived at his ease, and tried how the king and the queen he could please. A carriage he had out of orange peel made, 6 white mice who drew it, his orders obeyed. And day after day Tom Thumb might be seen with his carriage and mice near the king and the queen. But the queen soon got jealous and said, "I declare, Tom Thumb has a carriage as well as a chair." When I asked for a carriage, I met with reproach, and was told I must use the old family coach. I don't know, I'm sure, to what things may come, if the king spends so much on that little Tom Thumb. So she went to the king, and her face was quite red. "Dear, what is the matter?" the king to her said. "Oh, I don't like to tell, but I must tell," said she, "that Tom Thumb behaves, oh, so rudely to me." The king said, "I thought he was always polite." Said the queen, "He is civil when you are in sight, but oh, I so hate him, I wish he were dead. To oblige you," the king said, "we'll cut off his head." So he sent out his soldiers to find Sir Tom Thumb. The trumpets they blew, and they beat the big drum. And if any boys out in the street asked them why, they answered, "Because a brave knight is to die." Tom heard it and said, "I don't know as to that. Ere they cut off my head, I will put on my hat." Tom ran to his mother and told her his life was in danger because of the king's jealous wife. So his mother advised him to lie still in bed in order to save both his clothes and his head. So Tom went to bed and he slept for 10 days. And to sleep longer still, he tried all sorts of ways. At last he was tired of keeping awake. So he said, "I'll get up and a walk I will take." He walked for 2 days and for 3 or 4 nights, saw all sorts of people and all sorts of sights. Then he thought he must rest or his strength would soon fail, and he went to lie down in the shell of a snail. Tom soon fell asleep, but somebody spoke, and Tom, in alarm for his safety, awoke. He listened. "'Twas only some children at play," said he. "I had better keep out of their way. They are going to school, and when they are there, to find better lodging will be my first care." Just then came a little girl, 7 years old. Her frock was of silk, trimmed with spangles of gold. She took up the shell in which Tom Thumb was hid, and little she thought of the mischief he did. For she threw up the shell on a very high bank, and amid the long grass with Tom in it, it sank. The bank to Tom Thumb such a mountain appeared that he would never get to the bottom, he feared. "It will take me a week to go down it," said he, "and when I'm down there, what good will it be? I'll stop where I am till a lark comes this way. Then I'll mount on its back and fly quite away." Just then, as he spoke, he saw near the bank a friend of the queen's, a duke of high rank. "I'm caught now at last," said poor Tom in a fright, "and I much want to sleep with my head on tonight. But how to escape, I am sure I can't tell. Ah, there's a fine butterfly close to the shell. I'll jump on its back and be off in a trice. A ride on a butterfly's back must be nice." The Duke saw Sir Thomas just taking his flight, so he called him kindly. "Sir Thomas, good night." "Oh, Duke," said our hero, "I guess what you mean. Good night, sir, and give my respects to the Queen." Then flew up the butterfly. Tom with him went, but the butterfly could not make out what it meant, that, without asking leave, any mortal dare. So he flew over houses and churches and trees, and Tom soon began to feel not quite at ease. The butterfly tried to make Tom Thumb fall down. In a puddle he threw him, that there he might drown. Tom Thumb thought that drowning would not do him good, so he called out for help quite as loud as he could. And whilst he was shouting, 2 soldiers came by. "Sir Thomas," they said, "the king says you must die. But you know it is said, whilst there is life, there is hope, and 'tis better to wait for the axe or the rope than to drown in a puddle. So now out you come, and we shall get something for finding Tom Thumb." When they came to the palace, the king had gone out. The queen heard a noise and asked what 'twas about. They told her that little Tom Thumb had been found. "Before he was lost," said the queen, "I'll be bound. The king likes that dwarf and will not have him killed, but I'll let him know that I too am self-willed. Put Tom in a mouse trap, and there let him stay. Give him nothing to eat or to drink all the day." So there in the trap poor Tom Thumb was kept, and more from vexation than hunger he wept. The queen's kitten thought that a mouse or a rat in the trap had been caught, so she gave it a pat. She was rather surprised when our hero she saw, and she opened the trap by a dab of her paw. Once more Tom was free, but a spider came by, and taking the knight for a blue bottle fly, sprang toward to seize him. Our brave little knight stood his ground, drew his sword, and made ready to fight. But the spider drew near, and his poisonous breath so affected poor Tom that it soon caused his death. He fell on the ground where he lately had stood, and the spider sucked up the last drop of his blood. 2 days and 3 nights in lamenting they spent. Then under a rose bush they buried Tom Thumb. His monument cost them a very large sum, for on it his name, death, and doings were told, and it had this inscription in letters of gold: "Here lies Tom Thumb, King Arthur's knight, who died by a spider's cruel bite. He was well known in Arthur's court, where he afforded a gallant sport. He rode at tilt and tournament, and on a mouse a hunting went. Alive he filled the court with mirth, his death to sorrow soon gave birth. Wipe your eyes, and shake your head and cry, alas, Tom Thumb is dead. This has been the story of Tom Thumb by the McLoughlin Brothers, originally published in the 1880s, narrated by Bethany Reyes for Tales Reawakened for YouTube.